She grew up in a small home where money was always counted twice before being spent. The walls were thin, the furniture old, and the days often felt long. Still, there was one thing that never felt small in her life: music. From a young age, she was drawn to the sound of piano keys. Even when the piano she practiced on was worn and out of tune, she treated it with care, as if it were alive. Playing was not a hobby for her. It was how she understood the world and made sense of her feelings. As a child, she would practice late into the evening, long after others had gone to sleep. Her fingers learned to move without thinking, guided by emotion rather than rules. She never imagined grand stages or applause. Music was private, almost sacred. It helped her through quiet struggles, through moments when life felt unfair or heavy. As she grew older, life became more demanding. She worked long hours to support herself, often taking jobs that left her tired before the day even ended. Music took a back seat, but it never left her heart. Whenever she had time, she returned to the piano. Sometimes it was in community halls, sometimes in borrowed rooms, sometimes on old instruments that barely held their sound. Still, she played as if each note mattered. People who heard her play often said she had something special, but she brushed it off. Praise made her uncomfortable. She had learned not to expect too much from the world. Opportunities did not come easily to someone like her, and she accepted that reality with quiet strength. One afternoon, while helping at a local cultural center, she was asked if she would consider performing at an upcoming event. The gathering was not like anything she was used to. It was being held at a large venue known for hosting wealthy guests, business leaders, and donors. The audience would be dressed in fine clothes, speaking confidently about things she knew little about. At first, she thought the invitation was a mistake. She even asked twice if they were sure they meant her. She explained that she was not a professional performer, that she did not have fancy training or connections. But the organizer insisted. They had heard her play during a small rehearsal and believed her music deserved to be heard. That night, she barely slept. Her thoughts were filled with doubt. She imagined walking into the room and feeling invisible, judged before she even touched the piano. She worried about her simple clothes, her quiet voice, her lack of confidence. A part of her wanted to decline and return to her familiar, safe routine. But another part of her felt something different. It was not pride or ambition. It was a quiet pull, a sense that this moment mattered for reasons she could not explain. She agreed to perform. In the days leading up to the event, she practiced whenever she could. Not to impress, but to stay true to herself. She chose a piece that spoke of patience and strength, something honest. She told herself that if she played from the heart, that would be enough. On the day of the event, she arrived early. The venue was grand, with tall ceilings, shining floors, and soft lights that made everything look distant and unreal. People moved around confidently, greeting each other with ease. Their laughter filled the space, light and effortless. She stood quietly near the side, holding her bag close. No one noticed her at first, and that was fine. She observed the room, taking it all in. She reminded herself that she belonged there as much as anyone else, even if it did not feel that way. As guests continued to arrive, the atmosphere grew louder. Conversations revolved around success, money, and influence. She listened without judgment, but she felt the gap between their world and hers. Still, she stayed calm, breathing slowly, focusing on the music she would soon play. She did not know that among the guests was a wealthy man who believed status defined talent. He had attended many events like this and believed he could tell who mattered within seconds. To him, this was just another evening meant to impress. As the time for the performance approached, she was guided toward the piano. Her heart beat faster, but her face remained calm. She sat down, resting her hands lightly on the keys, feeling their familiar weight beneath her fingers. Before she could begin, she sensed eyes on her. Some curious, some doubtful. A few whispers drifted through the room. She did not yet know what was being said, but she could feel the judgment in the air. Still, she closed her eyes for a moment and reminded herself why she was there. Not to prove anything, not to fit in, just to play. The room settled, But the real test had not yet begun. What would happen next would challenge her in ways she never expected, setting the stage for a moment that would change the atmosphere of the entire evening. As she adjusted her hands on the piano keys, a subtle tension filled the room. Some guests were curious about her, others were indifferent, and a few seemed impatient. Among them, a wealthy man watched closely, his expression sharp and dismissive. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, and whispered to the person next to him. His words were not meant for her ears, but they carried enough weight to make the nearby guests glance her way. He questioned why someone like her had been invited to perform, implying that her background did not match the elegance of the evening. She heard nothing specific at first, only a faint hum of conversation and the soft clinking of glasses. But she felt the judgment, the silent doubt that weighed heavily on her shoulders. She knew that many in the room had already decided she did not belong, before a single note had left her fingers. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that she had faced doubt before. Every time she played in small community halls, there had been skepticism. People often underestimated her. But music had always been her answer. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment longer. She glanced at the wealthy man, his eyes meeting hers briefly, sharp with unspoken criticism. She could sense the whispers growing, like a current flowing through the room, moving toward judgment. Some people smirked quietly. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to react. She could feel the energy in the air, hesitation, doubt, and subtle ridicule. It would have been easy to turn away, to pack up and leave. Many would have, especially someone like her, unused to the atmosphere of wealth and status. But she stayed. She focused on the sound in her mind, the melody she had been practicing for days, and the story she wanted to tell through the music. She reminded herself that she was not there to impress anyone. She was there to express herself. That thought brought a sense of calm, even as the room seemed to lean toward judgment. The wealthy man shifted in his chair, clearly waiting for her to stumble. He made another quiet comment, this time loud enough for her to catch a hint of the words. He mocked her lightly, implying that her place was not among the sophisticated guests. His tone carried condescension, as if he were testing how she would react. Many of the nearby guests laughed softly, adding to the pressure. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, but instead of fear, she felt a strange determination. This was her chance, not to prove him wrong, but to show herself and the room that music had power beyond judgment. She sat up straight, taking another deep breath. She told herself that the rich man's opinion was just noise, an echo of insecurity, and that her value could not be measured by someone else's arrogance. Slowly, she allowed her hands to settle on the keys, feeling the familiar textures beneath her fingertips. The first touch brought comfort. She closed her eyes briefly and let her mind focus entirely on the music, blocking out everything else. As she began to play, the notes started softly, almost timidly, filling the air with a gentle rhythm. Some guests still whispered, some looked at their watches, but gradually, her presence began to change the atmosphere. The melody she played was not flashy or showy, but it was honest, full of emotion and nuance. Each note carried a story, a memory, and a feeling she had experienced. The room began to lean in, almost imperceptibly, as people realized this performance was different. The wealthy man frowned, noticing that the whispers were fading. He had expected her to falter, to struggle under the weight of the audience. But the music continued, deliberate and strong. It told of resilience, patience, and quiet strength. The rich man's eyes narrowed, unsure how to react. He had anticipated mockery or embarrassment, yet she remained composed, calm, and skillful. His previous arrogance began to falter under the simple power of her playing. Some guests began to straighten in their seats, drawn to the sound. The room, which had been filled with casual conversation, started to quiet naturally. People stopped moving about, turning their attention to the piano. Even the faintest whispers vanished as the music pulled focus. The melody spoke in a language no one could deny, transcending status, background, and expectation. She could feel the room shifting, the energy changing from doubt to attention. She had captured their interest not with words, but with something deeper, something real. For a moment, she felt a mixture of nervousness and exhilaration. The wealthy man's presence was still there, still critical, but it no longer held the power to shake her. She had entered a space where music could speak for her. Each note became a statement of her identity, her years of practice, and her quiet determination. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. He had mocked her before she even played, yet it was her music that now commanded the room. Her hands moved more confidently over the keys. She let her emotions guide her, each phrase building upon the previous one. She imagined herself in her childhood room, alone at the piano, pouring her heart into each melody. That memory gave her strength. The wealthy man who had doubted her seemed smaller now, irrelevant compared to the truth she was expressing. The audience, sensing authenticity, began to listen not as critics, but as witnesses to something genuine. The rich man's expression shifted slightly. He could no longer hide his surprise. His eyes followed her hands, watching the flow and precision of her playing. There was no pretense, no attempt to impress beyond honesty. His smirk faded. The subtle confidence that had marked his demeanor earlier now wavered. In that room, for the first time, he encountered someone who could not be measured by wealth, appearance, or privilege. The music filled the entire hall. Each note resonated, connecting with the audience in a way that words could not. The whispers that had once questioned her presence were gone. She felt the tension around her soften, replaced with anticipation, curiosity, and respect. People were leaning forward slightly, eager to hear more, feeling the story she was telling unfold through the piano. She noticed that her hands no longer trembled. She was fully absorbed in the moment, free from fear, expectation, or doubt. The wealthy man's eyes followed every movement, but she did not play for him. She played for herself and the room, and slowly, the music began to speak louder than any criticism or judgment ever could. The room was responding to the authenticity in her playing, recognizing skill, emotion, and courage beyond surface-level impressions. Her performance continued, each phrase more assured than the last. She allowed herself to explore the dynamics, the quiet passages and the powerful crescendos, demonstrating control and emotion simultaneously. The audience could feel the journey she was taking them on, the highs and lows, the struggles and triumphs. Her playing told a story of someone who had faced doubt, worked hard in silence, and finally had a moment to express her truth. By the end of the piece, the wealthy man was no longer the imposing figure he had seemed. His judgment had been rendered meaningless by the undeniable reality of her skill. The room was transformed. People who had questioned her were now fully attentive, some nodding slightly, others closing their eyes to absorb the music fully. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, the final notes lingering in the air, carrying the weight of her effort and the quiet power of her resilience. She had not spoken a word, yet she had answered every doubt, every criticism, and every expectation placed upon her. The wealthy man, along with everyone else, had been confronted with the simple truth. Talent and dedication cannot be dismissed by status or privilege. She stood there quietly, her heart steady, knowing that the music had done what words never could. In that moment, she realized her strength was not in proving others wrong, but in staying true to herself, letting her talent speak for her when the world tried to silence it. As the music continued, a remarkable change began to sweep through the room. The gentle start had gradually built into a melody that carried both strength and vulnerability, and people could not help but be drawn in. Guests who had been leaning on their tables, chatting quietly, slowly turned their heads, their attention captured by the sound. The melody was not just notes on a page. It was a story told through every movement of her hands. It spoke of determination, patience, and quiet resilience that only life could teach. The wealthy man, who had initially mocked her, now sat forward, his arms uncrossed, eyes fixed on the piano. The confidence that had once radiated from him was replaced by curiosity, then slowly by awe. He had assumed that her presence was a mistake, that she would falter and confirm his prejudice. Instead, he was witnessing something far more powerful than he had anticipated. The music was honest, unpretentious, and full of depth. It demanded attention not because it was flashy, but because it was real. Around him, the room changed as well. People who had whispered and smirked were now silent, their expressions softening. Some guests were leaning slightly forward in their seats, eyes closed, letting the melody flow through them. The clinking of glasses and muted laughter had faded completely. Every note seemed to draw them in, telling a story that no words could convey. She could feel the room responding to her. The energy in the space had shifted from doubt and judgment to attention and quiet respect. It was almost palpable. She did not need to look at the audience to know they were listening. The atmosphere itself had changed. The weight of the wealthy man's earlier mockery was no longer a burden. His judgment had no power over the music. The sound she produced carried everything that needed to be said. Her fingers moved with confidence now, guided by years of practice and the emotions she had stored through her life. She allowed herself to play freely, expressing feelings she had held quietly for too long. Each chord and phrase told of patience, struggle, and hope. The story she was weaving through the piano filled the room with an almost tangible emotion that touched everyone present. There was no place for pretension here, no room for arrogance. Only the music mattered. The wealthy man shifted in his seat. He could not look away. He had assumed he knew everything about what mattered and who deserved recognition. Yet here, in front of him, someone who came from a different world was showing skill, passion, and poise that could not be bought or claimed through status. The irony was clear. He had mocked her, yet she was now commanding the room in a way that no wealth could replicate. Her playing began to swell, the melody rising with confidence, then softening to more delicate passages. The room seemed to breathe along with her music, the ebb and flow guiding the audience's attention. Guests leaned into the performance, some unconsciously holding their breath, feeling the tension and release of every note. She could sense that she had their full focus. It was no longer about proving anyone wrong. It was about the shared experience of music, the unspoken connection between her and the audience. The wealthy man's face revealed a mix of emotions: surprise, respect, and perhaps a hint of regret. He had underestimated her, and now he could not deny her talent. The room's attention had shifted completely, and he realized that his assumptions were irrelevant. Her skill, her passion, and her courage spoke louder than any social status. The irony of the situation was not lost on her. She felt a quiet satisfaction, not from triumph over him, but from the knowledge that music had its own power. Some guests were visibly moved. A few had tears in their eyes, touched by the honesty in her playing. Others were nodding, as if silently acknowledging the depth and skill of the performance. The wealthy man, once confident and mocking, now watched silently, his pride quietly humbled. He understood, in a way he had not expected, that judgment based on appearances could never capture the truth of talent and dedication. She continued, allowing her emotions to guide the performance, weaving a tapestry of sound that carried through the room. She was no longer aware of the wealthy man's presence as a source of pressure. Instead, she saw the entire audience as part of her expression, each listener absorbing the story she was telling through the piano. Her music conveyed a journey of perseverance, courage, and quiet strength, a reflection of her own life. The room seemed to transform with every note. What had begun as a gathering marked by social hierarchy and casual conversation had become an intimate space of shared emotion. Guests who had arrived with preconceived notions about talent and worth were now witnessing the undeniable power of dedication and authenticity. The wealthy man, who had tried to measure her by his own standard, was now confronted with a reality he could not deny. As the final passages approached, the music became more intense, more expressive. The audience leaned in, fully absorbed. The wealthy man's eyes followed every movement of her hands, now without judgment, only with fascination. She played with confidence, each note carefully crafted, each phrase carrying meaning. The room was completely silent, the sound of the piano filling every corner, leaving no space for distraction or doubt. When the last note lingered and faded, the room remained silent for a moment longer. It was a silence not of awkwardness, but of awe, as if the audience was collectively exhaling, absorbing what they had just experienced. The wealthy man, once mocking, now seemed reflective. He had seen what genuine talent looked like, and he understood the humility and effort behind it. The audience, too, seemed transformed, recognizing that skill and dedication were not bound by wealth or status. The impact of her performance was immediate and profound. Guests who had been skeptical were now attentive and respectful. Even those who had dismissed her initially could not ignore the truth of her ability. The room had been silenced, not by intimidation or force, but by the authenticity of her music. She had not spoken a word, yet she had communicated more than any conversation could. She allowed herself a quiet moment, hands resting lightly on the keys. She had played from the heart as she had always done, and it had changed the atmosphere completely. The wealthy man, along with everyone else, had been confronted with a simple reality. True talent and dedication could not be dismissed. They commanded attention, respect, and admiration. In that moment, she realized the power of staying true to oneself. She had faced doubt and judgment, yet she remained grounded, letting her skills speak for themselves. The room had been transformed not by her words, but by her music, a testament to the quiet strength that had always been within her. The wealthy man's earlier mockery was irrelevant now, overshadowed by the undeniable truth that her talent, her dedication, and her honesty had the ability to touch and silence a room full of people who had once doubted her. When the final note faded, the room was filled with a silence heavier than any applause could have been. It was not empty silence, but one of reflection and awe. Guests remained in their seats, some leaning forward slightly, their hands folded in quiet contemplation. A few who had been talking or moving earlier now sat still, trying to process the performance they had just witnessed. The melody lingered in the air, echoing softly, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the music and were holding it gently. The wealthy man who had mocked her before the performance now sat in a different posture. He had leaned back with crossed arms and smirks, confident in his judgment. But now he was forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, eyes wide. For the first time, he faced the realization that he had underestimated someone based on appearance and social status. His expression reflected a mix of surprise, regret, and a growing sense of humility. He did not know how to respond immediately. Words felt insufficient against what he had just experienced. Other guests began to shift in their seats, some quietly nodding, others exchanging glances with each other, acknowledging the depth of what had just occurred. There were no loud praises or exaggerated reactions yet, only subtle, sincere recognition. The atmosphere in the room had transformed from one of casual social display to something deeper, almost reverent. She had spoken through her music, bypassing conversation and pretense, and the impact was unmistakable. The woman rose slowly from the piano bench, her hands brushing the keys lightly. She did not rush to leave or seek validation. She had done what she set out to do, express herself honestly. Her eyes scanned the room, noting the change in energy. Guests who had looked down on her now seemed reflective, as if they were reassessing their assumptions. Even the wealthy man's demeanor had softened. He avoided direct eye contact, aware that his earlier judgment had been unkind and misplaced. As she walked away from the piano, a few guests quietly approached her. They spoke softly, offering sincere compliments and asking how she had developed her skills. Some expressed amazement, acknowledging that they had not expected such talent from someone who appeared so unassuming. She listened with humility, thanking them gently, but she did not linger on praise. For her, the performance was not about recognition. It was about sharing something true and meaningful. The wealthy man, meanwhile, lingered near the back of the room, clearly debating whether to approach her. When he finally did, his steps were measured, cautious. He did not carry the earlier arrogance that had defined him. Instead, he seemed weighed down by the realization of his own hasty judgments. When he spoke, His voice was softer than before, carrying an almost apologetic tone. He acknowledged that he had misjudged her and admitted that her performance had humbled him in a way he had not anticipated. She accepted his words with quiet grace. There was no need for confrontation or explanation. The music had already conveyed everything. His apology, though unexpected, was met with understanding. She had already experienced doubt and dismissal countless times in her life. This was another instance, but it came with a sense of closure. The performance had transformed not only the room but also the dynamics between them. Other guests, observing this exchange, seemed to internalize a lesson of their own. The air that had once been thick with judgment and superiority now carried subtle admiration and respect. People who had assumed status or wealth-defined worth were quietly reminded that talent, dedication, and authenticity could not be measured by social standing. The woman's music had become a mirror, reflecting the truth of human potential and the folly of shallow judgment. She took a few moments to collect herself in a quiet corner, feeling the emotional weight of what had just happened. The room's response was more than she had anticipated. The silence, the humility, and the newfound respect were proof that her music had transcended simple entertainment. It had touched people, unsettled assumptions, and created a space where honesty and skill mattered more than appearances. In those moments, she also reflected on her own journey. Years of private practice, long hours of dedication, and quiet perseverance had led to this moment. She realized that the struggles, the doubts, and the small victories had shaped not only her skill but her ability to remain grounded under scrutiny. The experience reinforced her understanding that true talent was not about applause or recognition but about the ability to convey something real and meaningful. The wealthy man, meanwhile, returned to his seat, visibly humbled. He avoided the earlier bravado, now quiet and reflective. His gestures of mockery had been replaced with an awareness of the limits of his assumptions. Others in the room seemed to notice the change, some exchanging small, knowing glances. The woman's performance had done more than entertain. It had subtly redefined social dynamics and reminded everyone that judgment without understanding could never reveal the truth. As the event continued, small conversations emerged, not about wealth, status, or influence, but about music, expression, and dedication. Guests discussed how moving the performance had been, how skill and passion could be underestimated when hidden behind simplicity or humility. She observed these conversations with quiet satisfaction. The impact of her music extended beyond the piano, beyond the performance itself, into the very mindset of the audience. The wealthy man eventually approached her again, this time with a small, respectful gesture, offering a handshake and a brief acknowledgement of the power of her performance. She accepted calmly, the interaction concise but meaningful. It was a silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. He had been proven wrong, not through argument or confrontation, but through art. His pride was tempered, and there was a subtle lesson imparted about the value of listening and observing before judging. Other guests continued to approach her with admiration and curiosity, each interaction reinforcing the idea that authentic talent commands attention and respect, regardless of social background. She responded with warmth and humility, knowing that her performance had bridged the gap between assumption and reality. The evening, initially full of casual chatter and subtle judgment, had transformed into an environment of sincere appreciation and reflection. As she prepared to leave, she felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The wealthy man's earlier mockery no longer mattered. It had been replaced with acknowledgement and respect. The room had changed, even if only subtly, and that shift was profound. She realized that sometimes, the most impactful moments occur not through confrontation or debate, but through the quiet demonstration of one's true abilities. Walking away from the piano, she felt the strength of her own perseverance. The audience, now quietly appreciative, had witnessed something authentic. The wealthy man, once dismissive and critical, had learned a lesson in humility and the power of genuine skill. Her music had done more than entertain. It had communicated a truth that words could not. In that moment, she understood that the influence of authenticity and talent extends far beyond recognition. shaping perception and inspiring reflection in ways that remain with people long after the performance ends. In the days following the performance, the impact of her music continued to unfold in ways she had not expected. People who had attended the event reached out to her, expressing admiration for her skill and the emotions she had conveyed. They spoke not just of technique, but of the honesty and depth that came through in every note. She received messages from guests who admitted they had doubted her before the performance, only to be humbled by the experience. These interactions were sincere, unforced, and often deeply moving, reflecting the lasting impression she had made. Despite the attention, she remained grounded. She returned to her daily life, working her usual hours, caring for her responsibilities, and practicing when time allowed. She did not seek fame or accolades, knowing that her true fulfillment came from the act of creating music itself. Yet she noticed that people now treated her differently, with a quiet respect that had not been present before. The wealthy man, in particular, reached out again, offering a genuine acknowledgement of his earlier behavior. He admitted his error, expressing regret for the way he had judged her so quickly, and thanked her for the lesson in humility and authenticity. Their conversation was brief, but it carried weight. He did not attempt to diminish his earlier behavior with excuses or empty compliments. He simply recognized the truth that had been impossible to ignore during her performance. She accepted his words with grace, understanding that the moment was not about revenge or pride, but about recognition of something greater than social status, true talent and the courage to express it. The story of her performance began to circulate quietly. Friends and acquaintances of the guests spoke of the young woman who had played at the event, capturing the attention of everyone present, silencing even the most skeptical. Though the spread of her story was gradual, it reached people who had never heard her music before, and each retelling carried the essence of her authenticity and dedication. She remained modest about the attention, preferring that the focus remain on the music itself rather than her personal life. Over time, she was offered more opportunities to perform, invitations that previously might have seemed out of reach. Each invitation was considered carefully. She did not accept every offer, but she chose those that felt genuine, where her music could continue to touch hearts without compromise. Her performances became a bridge between her world and others, a way for people from different backgrounds to experience something pure and moving. Through all of this, she reflected on what had truly mattered during that first performance. It was not the moment of judgment, the wealthy man's initial mockery, or the temporary discomfort of being underestimated. It was the music itself, the honesty, dedication, and courage she had poured into it. She realized that the most powerful impact comes not from reacting to others, but from staying true to oneself and expressing that truth fully. The wealthy man, who had been her harshest critic before the performance, became a quiet supporter. He never sought to overshadow her achievements or claim any connection beyond acknowledgement. His change in demeanor was subtle but profound, and it served as a reminder that even those who judge quickly can learn, adapt, and grow when confronted with authenticity. Their interactions, though brief, left a lasting impression on both of them, highlighting the human capacity for reflection and humility. In her everyday life, she noticed small changes as well. People who had once dismissed her casually now approached her with genuine curiosity about her music, her experiences, and her perspective. Conversations that might have focused on social standing or superficial judgments were now filled with interest in what she had to offer creatively. She welcomed these exchanges, appreciating the way her art had opened doors to understanding and connection that were not previously accessible. The experience also strengthened her confidence in ways that were subtle but enduring. She no longer doubted her ability to remain composed under scrutiny or to let her talent speak when faced with judgment. The knowledge that her music could command attention and respect, even in the most unlikely circumstances, gave her a quiet assurance. This assurance was not boastful or loud, but a steady presence that guided her through each new opportunity and challenge. As months passed, she continued to play, always with the same devotion and sincerity that had defined her early practice sessions. She discovered that the joy of music was not diminished by recognition. Rather, it was enriched by the knowledge that her expression had meaning for others. Each performance, no matter the size of the audience, carried the potential to touch hearts, change perceptions, and inspire reflection. She approached each opportunity with care, ensuring that her focus remained on the music rather than the applause. The wealthy man occasionally attended events where she performed, observing quietly from a distance. He did not intrude or interfere, but his presence was a subtle acknowledgement of his respect. Others who had been present at the original event often shared their memories of her performance with newcomers, emphasizing the power of her authenticity and skill. In this way, her influence spread naturally, rooted in the truth of her talent rather than exaggeration or spectacle. She came to understand that the lasting impact of her performance was not just on individual guests or the wealthy man, but on herself as well. The experience reinforced the importance of perseverance, humility, and the courage to express oneself honestly, even in the face of doubt. It reminded her that recognition is not the goal, but a byproduct of dedication and authenticity. This understanding shaped her approach to both music and life, guiding her toward opportunities that aligned with her values and her desire to create meaningful connections. In quiet moments, she would reflect on the journey that had led her to that stage. From childhood practice in a small, humble home to performing in a room filled with people who had once underestimated her, she saw a narrative of resilience and self-belief. She recognized that each challenge, each moment of doubt, had prepared her for the opportunity to convey her truth. The wealthy man's initial mockery had been a small obstacle in comparison to the larger lesson, the power of staying true to oneself. Her life continued with the same rhythm as before, but enriched by the knowledge that her music could make a difference. Each note she played carried the memory of that night, the lesson of humility and authenticity, and the understanding that talent and dedication are recognized when expressed fully and honestly. The room had been silenced once, but the echoes of that moment remained, influencing her future performances and the people who experienced them. She remained grounded, never seeking to be defined by others' expectations or the attention she had received. Instead, she focused on the simple, profound act of creating music and sharing it with those willing to listen. The wealthy man's transformation, the guests' respect, and the ongoing impact of her performance were reminders that genuine skill and authenticity have a power beyond social standing or initial judgment. In the end, her story was not about proving anyone wrong. It was about the enduring truth that dedication, honesty, and passion can touch lives and change perceptions in ways words alone cannot.